All right, what's happening, guys? Welcome back. Moving into chest day for this training block. So we're just going through picking our exercises for the next 4 to 6 weeks. The plan is to start with a cable fly first, move into the prime incline second, Atlantis flat third, and then the prime fly at the end. This will be like an abnormal amount of output for me, trying to kind of build up that work capacity for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then hopefully transition into dumbbells flat after that, and then incline after that. So that's kind of me thinking ahead, anywhere between 2 to 4, 2 to 5 months in advance of how those exercises are going to kind of progress into one another. We'll walk through each exercise as we go, and hopefully be able to land on a session that we can emulate for the next 4 to 6 weeks. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, be sure to leave them down below. All right, guys, so getting warmed up. We're just gonna do some neutral grip dead hangs. Or actually, we're gonna do pronated grip dead hangs. We're gonna do some PNF with the band, the lats, do some protraction work, and that'll be it. Starting with cable flies, number one. Big thing to focus on. We're gonna do cable flies, and also do the machine fly. I want you to pay attention to how the cables converge versus diverge. So we'll start with the fly, better for getting into that shortened pec. The fourth exercise, we're gonna do the prime fly. Probably be a little bit better in the lengthen because the cables are going to pull outward, right? The cables are going to be in an abducted shoulder position, where the machine later is going to circle back around and really help us find that stretch position. A lot of people try and stretch their pec on this cable machine, and it's not going to be as effective if you have access to an actual fly machine where the cables converge behind your back rather than diverge outward away from your shoulder. Trying to stretch your pec, probably not the best place to do it. So we're going to integrate that warm up in as we do, get moving on this, and then move to the 2 machine presses, and then finish with the prime fly.
So going through this push session with our friend Calvin as well as Jordan, what I'm going to be looking at getting from this session is this is basically my secondary push session to my more powerlifting specific training session of the week. So I'm actually utilizing this cable fly as a way to reintegrate some joint sense relationship in my upper body, as more often than not, I'm pinned to a bench press during the week, and I'm moving through a very static, very precise movement pattern when it comes to competition bench. So today, I'm actually gonna be utilizing our cable fly to begin to create a little bit more awareness around my scap and how I move in space.
All right, so moving on to second exercise, we did 2 working sets. So working sets now is kind of the loose definition. First week on a new program, you're gonna have to expect some variance in your actual output. So these numbers that we're working off are just gonna be baseline. We're gonna start to beat the book on a week to week, moving into subsequent sessions. So second exercise now, incline press on the prime. Probably not gonna play around with any accommodating resistance. We're not gonna mess around with that arc at all. Just go straight sets, straight weight, work up to a top set of 2. Keep reps around 8. If we see it dropping below that, we'll lighten the load, trying to figure out a good rep range to start to work from. Later on in the program, as we transition into the next block, what we're probably going to do is we might then start playing around with overloading that bottom position, underloading the top position. But yeah, pretty straightforward movement. I think the biggest thing to take away when you use machines is understand the arc, right? Look at the arm and understand where it's gonna go, and have your elbow setting your forearm trajectory towards where the weights want to go. Now understand we're not playing with free weights, right? We're not dealing with forces necessarily that are gonna be acting on us in a linear fashion. So when we try and overcome this load, we're going to make sure that, you know, we're tracking with the arc, we're working with the machine. So this is going to put an extra emphasis on the importance of your setup to make sure that as you arc with that machine, we're still loading the appropriate tissue. So it's going to take a little bit of to kind of fuss around with it and get it where we want to, but that's going to be the goal with this one. Special consideration with using machines is you'll notice I'm taking a closer grip. Thinking about the arm path as you press through that machine. So like closer grip will leave your shoulder more adducted. So for me, the idea of challenging like the clavicular portion of the pec, I want an arm path that basically takes this from here to somewhere up here, right? Like medial 2/3 border of the clavicle. So I'm a little bit more tucked in. That allows this humerus to kind of maintain that path. You notice as it starts to fatigue, it starts to flare out, nothing sets over. Okay, so moving into second press, third exercise of the workout. It's the Atlantis flat press. Working the shoulder in a more stable position to allow us to drive output further in the session, right? So like probably wouldn't go flat first, then incline. Being in a more horizontal press position is gonna allow our humerus to stack over the scapula, give us a little bit more external stability, and use that pec to a greater degree this late in the session. So always something to keep in mind, like relative joint angles and how they'll give you access to output, or how they'll put a demand on you for stability and skill. So putting the horizontal second, and the pressing movements, and putting the vertical or the more vertical incline press first. That was kind of a strategy we'd use so we can drive that pec a little bit further. Now one thing you might notice is 2 grips on this machine. So if we look, one's gonna be angled, putting our shoulder in more adduction, one's gonna be a little bit wider. I'm gonna play around with both. My concern is that I'll probably prefer this grip, but it'll likely put me in a similar arm path to where I was on the incline press. I might like drive my hips up and bridge a little bit to try and recruit some different fibers, or if it feels good, I might just stick with it and just kind of send it on there. So one thing Killian did, put the plates underneath. If you don't do this, I would start just getting into setups and machines where you can challenge full range, or as full of the range as the machine will allow for it, while still not trashing your shoulders on that first rep. A good little tip for those of you who have access to machines like this. So you notice on the warm-up sets, a much bigger arch. Started running some issues with my left shoulder probably like a few months ago. Sleeping on airplanes and just really not taking care of it, being done with my training and recovery. So you'll notice on the last set, with the heavier weight, I actually worked on kind of keeping my ribs tucked in, keeping my pelvis stacked in my rib cage. Allows your shoulder blade to move a little bit freer. That way I wasn't jamming my arm into that AC joint, into that subacromial space. So, you know, sometimes when you have injuries like that, doesn't mean just, you know, sound the alarm and get out of it. So for me, it was just like understanding where that injury was coming from, where that pain, that perception of pain was coming from, and just switching my technique on the fly. So was able to drive, a decent amount of output on that set. Still not where I'd want to be. Shoulder still bothering me a little bit, but enough to stay in it for this exercise. So this is where like your ones and zeros, like understanding your anatomy really becomes one of your best training tools. Think of that comparison if you don't think about computers. And if you have an operating system with more ones and zeros, higher bit operating system, you can execute more complex programs, right? So if you can understand how to manipulate those ones and zeros, you can start to change that source code on the fly. That was really what I was focusing on. I started to run into an issue at 2 plates, 2 1/4. And then I was like, well, at 3, this is definitely going to exacerbate if I keep the same technique. So it's like, well, what is causing the issue? It's like something is approximating that subacromial space. So I just had to do what Antoine Vaillant would do and wear jorts. And that's what people are really here for. Is the jorts. We come for the knowledge, we stay for the jorts. And the panda socks? I think it's called that.
So there's a fashion sandwich here.
Fashion sandwich, okay.
There's the jorts. There's the panda socks. And in the middle, the meat.
The ham hocks.
Fucking calves. There's a science behind the madness.
I see it now. Yeah. It's like you put the lettuce over the bun to keep the moisture from making it soggy. There you go. Look at those. Look at those. The progress of the measuring stick on this exercise isn't going to be necessarily weight, although that will be a secondary byproduct. It will be the decrease in pain, right? The subjective experience of pain as that decreases will allow for the objective progress of weight. So this is going to be my focus in the next 4 to 6 weeks of this exercise is focus on pain and the performance will come. So decreasing that pain, weight goes up.
This one feel versus the incline?
Almost smoother, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think this is where we see the carryover from the basics, so to speak, like the barbell work, the dumbbell work, moving into these preset planes of motions, if you will. I'm definitely seeing the benefits now.
Last exercise of the workout, going through the prime fly machine. Talked a little bit earlier about the difference between, we'll see it on this one. Swing on this way. Notice how the cables pull from the center. And this is something that gets misappropriated a lot when we start switching around exercises. And look, I get it, gyms are busy. Sometimes you don't have a machine, sometimes you have to use a cable, that's cool. But given we have everything under the sun at Pure Muscle and Fitness, I'm going to pick this for the last exercise, try and spend some time in that stretch position, and this is going to help me pull this arm around sort of that curvature of my rib cage. It's going to force me to drive more scapular retraction or have that scapular retraction driven as a consequence of the direction of that arm because that vector is converging inward, right, rather than diverging outward. So the one thing too when using this machine is that you can adjust where it overloads on that arc. Now, I'm not a big fan of messing outside the normal cam shape, so we left it sort of in the middle. Now when we start to assess machines, you want to identify where it's going to be difficult, right? And that's where some people, frankly, they bitch out, is they don't understand where it's going to be hard and where that tension drops off. So like that machine hits in that middle range. It gets really hard, relatively speaking, where you're stronger, but you got to know that it drops off. So I've seen a lot of people hit that wall and they think that that tension is going to maintain as they get weaker, and then they just stop right there. Whereas if you understand how the profile of the machine works, you can power through knowing that if I just give a little bit more, I'm going to hit that sweet spot where that resistance starts to drop off, and let me find that shortened position. Even further than that, as the set gets late, when you hit that wall and you can't give any more to break through that sticking point to find that shortened position, so that's fine, we still got work to do back here. it'll still alleviate in this stretch position. So understanding how the profile is going to dictate where you fail or when you should fail or when you fail where, it's going to allow you to drive so many more effective reps in your actual exercise, right? So for me, you'll notice I start doing partial reps back here because it's like, well, this is still quote unquote easier, but I'm gonna hit that wall where it gets hard. It's like, well, look, I've already powered through that a few times. I'm hitting it now. Now I want to spend some time where I know I can still work and then really just take everything out of the tank, right? So that's going to be something that you always want to pay attention to. We'll harp on this every single time we do one of these. Every machine we're on, we're trying to identify where's that sticking point, where's it going to get easy, where's it hard, when do you need to fucking sack up and drive through, and then when do you know and where do you anticipate that that's going to end. I think the problem people run into is they get the calendar weeks really throw people off.
Yeah.
Like their ability to disassociate the day of the week and the thing that they're training is like really fucks people up. And like I've fallen victim to this because like, well, one less thing I have to deal with if I can associate a Monday with this muscle group, a Tuesday with this muscle group, a Wednesday with an off day. I find like in hitting the amount of volume that I can recover from, doing like a floating schedule, like a floating rotation that isn't strict within the borders of 7 days is so much better. Because I feel like people either under or overshoot their volume because they look at the 7 day arbitrary amount of time and go, I need to fit this many working sets in this amount of time. So what about 10 days?
100%. That's kind of where I am at now. Like I'm on a legs push pull split. And the first time I started that was the first time I had that floating rest day.
Right.
And it's weird to approach to begin with, but you get used to it in a matter of weeks and then it's no big deal anymore, right?
Yeah.
But it's a good point. I mean, you have to look at it as in terms of what's optimal for you to recover from and not what's optimal for your schedule outside of the gym. I mean, it's just a question of whether or not this is a priority enough to actually do that.
Yeah. I just think so many people end up doing just trash volume just to try and reach a number because they know they're not going to see that until the beginning of the next arbitrary. It's like your body has no idea what the calendar says.
Exactly.
Right? Like your body has no idea whether it's a Monday or Tuesday. Like it just knows stimulus and adaptation.
Yep.
It just knows stimulus and adaptation. So I think that's something that I need to teach myself because I've been very like, well, it's this day equals this, go do that kind of thing where it's like, no, it's the second day of my program and the second day of my like pre-legs. My next session is going to be legs. I train 3 days straight. Am I going to have a good leg session if I don't take a day off? Probably not.
I think a good way to get around that, because like you're a good example, you're so busy that it helps to associate a day with a muscle group, but I find it helps to just slot an amount of time every day, whether you're training or not to training.
Right.
And then even if you're not training, then okay, great, that day you can use that time for something else, but at least it's chalked out in your calendar regardless. Yeah. So that if you forget, then you know you're not stuck one day going, I literally don't have time to train, because that's not a good place to be either, right?
Yeah, I think like you were saying, like arbitrary like time considerations that people make, but the other thing is people don't evaluate for the idea that it's just work that needs to get done. Like people are always
talking
like,
about training or just like in general, because I think that statement goes both ways.
I think it's just life, right?
Yeah.
Like me and Calvin both came from a trades background, and it's like when you're an apprentice, you have to do 8,500 hours.
Yeah.
Well, you could do those hours one at a time if you're a shit employee and people fire you, or you can work a ton of overtime and get it done, right? So like, I just know the accumulation of work that needs to get done in a strength sense for me to attempt or perceive I can attempt an X amount. You know what I mean? So it's like my training will be these lifts that I need to accomplish. It's like, it would make almost more sense to write your training down as a list as opposed to a calendar. And you just check off performance markers along the way. It's like, okay, I maxed out X machine. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I hit this number for a 6 RM. Okay, that task is done, a new task can take its place. but people just choose days of the week to do some kind of work. And then in 6 weeks are like, oh, then my arms will be bigger because I did something. Like, so deserving.
It's what I'm interpreting you're saying is you just need to do what's necessary.
Yeah.
But I think listing it instills another necessity which people don't bring to the table, which is actually intensity, right? Like the necessity of intensity in your training session in order to fulfill this list. Because I think some people might hear what you say, and if you are someone who hears what or heard what Killian said and thinks this way, you're probably not training intense enough. Because if you think of that and the first thing you think is, no, like that's just going through the motions, it's like you're projecting that on him. That's not what he's saying. He's saying there's an urgency now because there's a list. 8,500 hours is a countdown, right? Like he's counting down to 0. He's counting down to that apprenticeship being over. Like that checklist of like, I need to be able to do this. It's like, and the word necessity, carries weight because it's by any means necessary. And that's where the intensity in training comes in. I feel like a lot of people, advocate that responsibility of the necessity because they just sort of let the results float rather than reverse engineering it.